Hey everybody, how are you guys doing? I'm Eric Airlock, and this is another talk on Chinese philosophy and the Yi Jing, what used to be called the I Ching system of ancient Chinese divination and philosophy. I need to do quite a few more talks on Chinese philosophy for this semester for the Asian philosophy class, what I also call East Asian philosophy, by which I mean Indian and Chinese philosophy. I already have many videos up on Indian philosophy as well as Zen and Chinese Buddhism, but I do not yet have up several videos on Chinese thought that I need to make on the 100 schools, 100 sages period. And we may as well start a bit here with the Yi Jing, what used to be called and read as Yi Jing, but just as Taoism used to look like Taoism in the old spellings of the Wade Giles system, the I Ching in the old Wade Giles is now in the Pinyin modern system, which the Chinese created in the 50s and then actually was adopted in the 80s, more when Chinese business back and forth again was adopted and picked up in the Western world, etc. The I Ching is now read as Yi Jing, and that is closer to how it is mispronounced by me. So hey, how'd that happen? The Yi Jing, known before as I Ching, and I'm just going to keep saying Yi Jing, is the famous ancient oracle system of ancient China. Originally, the Chinese diviners used turtle shells and bones to answer questions of kings, nobles, and common people, and answer those questions yes or no plenty, or entirely, depending on how they would crack over a fire. Turtles were thought to be symbolic of the cosmos, as their shells resemble the heavens round on the top, and Earth flat on the bottom, interestingly enough. Unfortunately, being sacred did not help the Chinese turtle all that much, as their numbers depleted from all the divination to the point that turtles were imported from Vietnam, effectively for a lot of China, well, what would be for the Chinese at the time, tribes, somewhat what they considered barbaric tribes, in the borderlands, and other southern lands, and cattle bones began to be used as substitutes because they ran out of turtles in what was China, which is quite incredible. The Yi Jing replaced this earlier system around 1000 BCE with the rise of the Zhou dynasty. Many systems of thought were influenced by the Yi Jing in warring states China, which is the seminal period of Chinese philosophy, including Confucianism and Taoism, the two native major schools of Chinese thought, joined by the third major school of Chinese thought, the import from India, Buddhism, as not the only three, but the three major schools of Chinese thought and philosophy overall in Chinese history. And then Chinese thought and history and philosophy influences history and philosophy in East Asia very much. Confucians and Taoists wrote commentaries on the books. Confucius considered the Yi Jing to be one of the 6 great classics of that tradition of the sage emperors, and made it central to his education system that became the entrance exams, for getting a position in the imperial bureaucracy. The original system is attributed to Fu Si. X is pronounced sort of HS with a bit of an H on the beginning of an S, and I fake it again and just try to make it. Fu Si was a mythical king who is said to have discovered the symbols of the Yi Jing hexagrams in the stars. It was then said to have been resystematized by King Wen, one of the founders of the Zhou dynasty. Wen, Zhou, and others of these are major Chinese families, names, periods, and history. It is impossible today to know whether these kings were the sages behind the system, or if the system was finalized as a book by Confucius himself, around 500 or so BCE. It is still debated, and I am sure people have great, of course, established opinions many different ways, and those of course, have been debated in China for quite a long time. That's, and quite official, so difficult to debate, but important to debate, that Confucius himself seems to have compiled the classics. How much did he add to them or make them the books they are, or how much were they like the books they were? It was like that when I got there. We do not know. The system of the Yi Jing is built out of 8 trigrams, which in pairs of upper and lower trigram form 64 hexagrams. Each trigram, 3 lines, is built out of solid and or broken open lines. Solid signifying male yang and broken signifying female yin, which is very much solid and empty. It's not so much broken as in fractured. It isn't that a woman is specifically sinful. It is that you have something like in a solid line, something like solid would be solid presence, and then broken would be line as absence, which is very much, of course, not only anatomy. I will have your parents explain to you when you're old enough to watch this video, But as well, of course, all that, and in fact, of course, these systems are quite sexual and gendered and interesting, is that you also have in that has to do with presence and absence and positive and negative in many different ways, and I do like ancient and medieval and modern systems of trying to organize things and the psychology behind all of that, which I definitely look at in post-Freudian ways, as in people definitely have looked at this in all kinds of ways and tried to syncretize it, and then we have Freud and Jung and others, and then now we can try to think about that rather freely and try to decide what of this all it means for ourselves. I come from the Haight-Ashbury. Many people have been into the Yi Jing, and I think it is very interesting as far as human common mind and psychology, and that's how I look at everything. So there are many people I know in the Haight and others, beatniks and others far before and in farther lands, who have been very into this. So there's a lot of interesting stuff here that you can see in the patterns, and what this meant for who and how and whom is kind of interesting. So in ancient times, no matter what one thinks about, again, the male, the female, the yin, the out, the yin and the yang, in ancient times, a question was asked and sticks were tossed to determine each line, starting from the top down. The counterculture of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, including surfers who were introduced to Taoism in Hawaii, beatniks, hippies, and New Age spiritual seekers, would toss coins, often quarters, heads being yang and tails being yin. 6 tosses equal 6 lines, giving 2 trigrams, 1 heaven and 1 earth. 3 lines above as heaven, 3 lines below as earth. Which itself has male, female, heaven, earth, sky father, earth mother positions, and that you will often find, and of course Freudians would say there's something sexual in gender here. I definitely believe and do argue a lot that people have a more, and it is, enjoy thinking that suggests, and I like thinking myself, people definitely understand the universe in terms of what they see around them. And when you have algebra and you have trains, you might understand the world is rather linear, algebraic, etc. If you are in ancient times, you would often look to what you have in your life in order to understand anything, and you would have family and gender and mothers and fathers, and so understanding things in terms of father and mother would be quite common, and we find that a lot. I don't think that it is necessarily Freudian as much as it is, as I like with Wittgenstein, not so much psychoanalytic as much as behavioristic for me, meaning that it is more how we see behavior in our minds, often culturally lining up in many ways, not necessarily that we have archetypes in our minds set in stone. But of course, with all of this stuff, it is quite remarkable how much the world's cultures line up, and you definitely see things in terms of male, female, mother, father, sky, earth, understandings throughout human culture. And this definitely lines up very powerfully with that, and then was taken by Freudians and Jungians, and still is in many ways, and I like in all kinds of ways. And I like thinking about the whole history and our minds in terms of all of that, with an open mind, of course. So the way that this was done, and is often done with countercultures who aren't doing the traditional ways of tossing and are just mimicking the practices, is often you toss quarters. Heads are yang and tails are yin, and 6 tosses equals 6 lines, giving 2 trigrams, 1 heaven and 1 earth. And the trigrams are, here, 3 solid lines is heaven, which is creative. A broken and then 2 solid lines is lake, which is reflecting or excess. A solid line, a broken line, and a solid line is fire, which is bright, conscious, and clinging. A broken line, and a solid line is thunder, which is exciting and sparking something. Solid, and broken is wind and wood. Interestingly enough, that's very much a non-being and a being, and it's kind of confusingly interrelated as wind and wood and some sort of fluid kind of growth or something. Penetrating and growth. You then have broken, solid. Broken is water, dark, danger, and profound. You have solid, broken is mountain, steady, and still. And then you have broken, which is earth. Solid is heaven on top. Broken is earth, which is receptive. Now, that's a lot to chew on, of course. But basically what is happening in the Yi Jing is they are usually, in fact, what you would do is you would toss quarters until you draw. So basically toss heads and tails if you want to do this. And what you do is you draw out 6 lines and then top down, and then draw out 6 lines top down. And what that is that's 4 trigrams. And what you're doing actually is you ask a certain sort of question, and you say, and what you're being told by the oracle is, this is kind of how it is, and this is kind of how it's shifting in and gonna be. Now, that doesn't tell you, kind of interestingly, and it's very creative and open and interesting, it doesn't tell you what exactly forever is necessarily gonna happen and be shut. It's telling you how things are in transition right now and this kind of thing. Things are in a different house and in retrograde right now, very much. It is very, of course, this is horoscopes, ancient Chinese horoscopes itself. So, essentially, I'm sure there are other systems, and I'm sure there were plenty of, I'm sure there were other systems at the time. This is sort of the classic system as it was written and solidified down with many different systems and understandings. So what you're doing is actually, you're taking what I just noted. What is that? In the classic pattern, yeah, that's 8. There are 8 of those 3-line things. So what you're actually saying is the current situation is one over the other right now of those 8, and it's moving into one over the other of the 8 in the future, if you get what I mean. So it is basically you throw the 6 quarters and you say, oh, so this over this, the 3 over the 3, and then you look up in the book and you find out, okay, that's the current state of things, is this 3 over this 3, which has all these combinations in the book. You find that combination, that's what's going on right now. You then throw another 6 lines. I've done this with friends for fun because I am not actually traditionally, much love, invested in it. I'm just interested in the psychology and the mind and everything quite freely, So with that, you then throw the other 6 lines. It's like, okay, so this is sort of what's going to go on with that in the future soon, or is where it's going. And then, so you say, hey, where's my job going? You put 1 like heaven over earth. Oh, things are like this. And then it's like fire over water. Oh no, but then it's going to get kind of horrible in these ways. And it was understood that it's not telling you everything, much like the Greek oracles were, as say in the Greek philosophy notes, dad joking us, essentially. They're sort of like, you're going to live and die. You're like, what? And then of course it goes according to that, but you just don't see it, and it's almost like some kind of weird joke. Socrates very much suggests, as does Heraclitus, that the oracles are kind of dad joking us, and the gods are dad joking us with their superior perspective and intellect. This is kind of like the heavens and earth are kind of showing you something of what's going on, but you're just sort of getting in the moment as you're thinking about something. It's supposed to be that you interacting with the stuff and reading the tea leaves means that these 6 things are the 3 over the 3. This is what's going on with what you were talking about. And then that's moving into this 3 over this 3. And that's how you use the books and the system, as it explains in any of these books and manuals you may pick up and look at. And they're actually online. You can throw thus. I have found websites, and it's easy to find. I won't point you towards one, where what you do, of course, is you say, okay, push the button, and it will just automatically generate the 6 lines, bang, right then, because you don't really need to flip the quarters. I mean, that's fun. But it was sticks coming out of I believe, out of a vessel or something like that in China, and I'm not doing that. So in all of these ways, of course, you are generating the 6 lines and then saying effectively, it's interesting to open your mind and think, well, this is sort of a way of looking at this situation now, this randomized, if you would like. way of looking at things, and then it's going to move out of that into this randomized way of looking at things, and that actually can have great positive benefit, even if, like me, you have no idea if this has anything to do with this or that spirit or what have you. Of course, I'm sure some people think this is fascinatingly good, and others think this could be potentially let in the demons, and then there's plenty on, the internet streaming sites for you to watch horror-wise about letting the wrong one in, you know what I mean? Let the right demon in, not the wrong one, the devil you know? Not the one you don't. That's the vampire girl. Again, yes, Breton, the French surrealist, says a crazy woman is the most lovable of all human beings. So, let the wrong one in. Well, the weekend's over now. So, yes, don't do that and be moral and uprighteous, children. So, what we have here, beyond my jokes, again, is that we see opposites in these trigrams. And so what's happening is we're playing on patterns and patterns and patterns. And I'm just noticing some of the ones I nerded out on this stuff, something fierce, and I got all into it, knowing full well I was looking for human emotion psychology frameworks, not trying to know what's happening this autumn specifically with a football team or not. But it is interesting that you see all sorts of patterns, and Leibniz, again, as we'll cover at the very end, as already mentioned in the modern European lectures, he very much was helped create the mechanical Abacus calculator proto-computer. He loved the Yi Jing as a German guy with a weird wig in the 1500s, and he liked all of these patterns and was fascinated by it and thought this may be the DNA of the universe, in the 1500s for a German guy. And the Germans, again, are going to go on to very much dominate a lot of intellect in the 17 and 1800s, and a lot of the scene. So Leibniz and others would note that creation is very much the beginning of the end reception, heaven the beginning of the end earth, which is like lightning and other things, and rain coming down right as rain downward to earth, like beginning, end, life, death, something like weirdly. And then you also have life grow out of the earth, so you have yin and yang and ins and outs and all of that kind of stuff. Is the figuring out of these patterns. Bright is the beginning of the end darkness, which is fire and water. Excitement or agitation is the beginning of the end growth, which is thunder leading to wind. Stillness is the beginning of the end excess, which is mountain is the beginning of the end lake. And think about mountains and lakes in China and everywhere where you're finding those as formations all intermixed. This is also geography, thus, as trying to figure out geography in a binary system, and we now have computer monitors and binary generated landscapes, and Leibniz is like, this is fascinating, little ones and zeros and binary systems of representation, which since the 80s and onward, you can't help but think fractal mountains and lakes and other things with binary computers. But of course, that had way yet to happen, way beyond Leibniz. Mandelbrot had to have computer monitors for all of that to see it. So when we invert a hexagram, changing its solid lines to broken and broken lines to solid, the opposite has an opposite role in process and change, oddly enough. And then things can be going opposite and can be decaying rather than going into life or back and forth. And you can have all sorts of reversions and inversions of patterns, reversals and inversions. And it definitely looks like the ways that things switch around historically have to do with who found what good when and ordered it so. There are 8, legally as well and politically as the figureheads. There are 8 hexagrams that are composed of a trigram and its reverse or mirror image. So creation, which of course is heaven either way, insight, which is wind on lake, synergy, fire on fire, nourishing, mountain on thunder, critical mass, lake on wind, danger, water on water, mindfulness, thunder on mountain, and reception, earth on earth. 4 of these 8 hexagrams are composed of the same trigram twice the trigrams that are symmetrical. The inversions are interesting as insight is the beginning of the end mindfulness, and nourishing is the beginning of the end critical mass. I always have to say that would, of course, be a mass of bicycles, coming in front of your, is caravanning on the Fridays. This is very similar to the inversions amongst the trigrams. There are 8 hexagrams that are composed of a trigram and its inverse. I have images I've found online that I've illustrated the website with. The diagonal from bottom to left to top right of the Fu Si order. Prosper, earth on heaven. Decline, mountain on lake. After ends, water on fire. Benefit, wind on thunder. Continuing, thunder on wind. Before ends, fire on water. Attraction, lake on mountain. And stagnation, heaven on earth. Ooh, baby. Prosper, stagnation, and after ends, before ends are both inverses and reverses, which is interesting because prosper, stagnation, and after end, before ends are actually like very important central kinds of things, somewhat metaphysically here. And they're both the inverse and reverses of themselves. So that sort of implies that where there's an incredible amount of patterns, of course, overlapping back and forth, that's where some of the most magic and central profound things happen in interesting ways. At least it does note, it looks like the system was set up with that. And of course, because people are trying to use the patterns and inversions and reversals of binary systems, the mind is very oppositional. We know this. Not entirely. We have 3 and 4 and ranges and all sorts of stuff, but very oppositional. Again, quite oppositional before we possibly start, if we do use number words late in the game plenty, for more complex practices alone, then actually more, opposition is more basic than than number words, and thus more discrete, again, quiet and polite quantities, rather than just more and less roughly, being rough about the ears. So you have these very interesting, strange patterns, and again, of course, I'm sure you can't verbally, and I have, of course, trouble following what it is I'm talking about here, but in walking out through the notes, you can find, as I did find when I got into all of this, that you find very strange, interesting plays in the patterns, and I got into that, and then, of course, found some things, and definitely was thinking, well, this would take a while, to find a great deal, and I actually have a great deal to do, and this is not my first and foremost thing. But it is quite fascinating, and you can find a lot of many different sorts of things. Prosperity is a beginning. Such is beginning. Stagnation is the beginning that is not beginning. After ends is an end that is ended. Before end is an end that is not ended. There's a lot of plays in moves of things where they do seem to be describing, while you can lose certainly such in the English a bit, and much is lost in translation. It also does seem that they are trying to line up the basic patterns of how things occur and then have that reflected clearly in the patterns. When we compare the original Fu Si order with the later King Wen order, which again shows you who is that probably these are systems from other people. Neither of these people invented entirely this, but with all of their advisors and everyone, you have the earlier order coming out of a bunch of patterns and then the later order. It becomes clear that the Fu Si order is composed of inversions and alternatives, while the King Wen order is based in reversals. So the Fu Si order, it actually does look, I have to say, the Fu Si order, the original one, makes a lot more sense to me, just looking at it as an outsider, as some white guy looking at it who's in California, who has, and I've had East Asian and Chinese friends growing up, and I look at the Fu Si order and it makes a lot of sense to me, and then the actual order in the more traditional latter order is the King Wen later order of this. And when I look at it, the original Fu Si seems to make a lot more sense. But that is my understandings, and I, again, humbly submit, I'm not the one centrally into this. But it does look like actually Fu Si, the original way it was set up, makes a lot more of a grid-like crossway sense. But then what happened was, and again, if you look at it, I think you may see what I'm talking about. And again, I'm not going to take us through each and every move. I'll drive us all nuts. But with the King Wen order actually took everything and set it more up on what you could call reversals instead of inversions, which is basically what looking at mirrorings of the patterns a different sort of way. And when that happened, it upsets a lot of the other patterns, but it actually centers everything on a certain other pattern as more primarily important. And that's what it looks like, is that they basically, instead of inversions, it's like, well, mirror reversals becomes what's important. And then if that's what's important, well, then that changes what's first and last, and then that changes kind of the way we look at it as a grid and a square of squares, which is definitely how the Chinese would have looked at it. They believe that the world consists of 10,000 things, or at least that's the expression. The 10,000 things is everything. 10,000 is 100 times 100, and 100 is 10 times 10. So we are talking about square, man. The order and the system and the man. And so you originally had the male ordering dude, yes, bride or otherwise, is Fu Si, basically ordered things in a way where it made a lot of sense with the grid and crossways, diagonals, and then King Wen steps in and he kind of changes it around to be based on another part of the pattern and kind of upset a whole lot of the other parts. That's what it appears to me, and I just have to say that's fascinating. Like, I just find that fascinating, and I'm not judging. I honestly do not know, enough about this. But that is history and food for thought. You can see it. The King Wen order is not composed of inversions or alternates, but is essentially a list of hexagrams and their reversals from start to finish. Thus, so it just catalogs them in an entirely different way. Just we're going to start this ways, and we're going to go through the whole thing this ways, and it kind of disrupts everything else you would see in the pattern there. This is why creation and reception are hexagram 1 and hexagram 2 for King Wen, but they are the first and last hexagram of Fu Si. Now, the reason this is important, to finish, King Wen took the hexagrams and focused on matching each with its reversal, without regard for the essential inversions and alternates of Fu Si, who clearly cared about those things. The reason I bring this up is because the way that the book is written and presented, in, I believe, Chinese as well as in English translations, you will have it in the King Wen, and you will look up through the table of contents, and I've done this as well, and you will say, this doesn't follow the order I might think if you are interested in the Fu Si patterns originally. That is because the way the book now is in the order of the King Wen, I do believe. So when you flip through, I have a couple of Yi Jings in English, at least 3, and they follow the King Wen, each of them. So that is my understanding of how all of that works. A bit about Leibniz, again, the interesting guy. The early modern German philosopher Leibniz invented the binary system still used by computers today, which may or may not give way to something else like quantum computers in the near future if we can store everything in the folds of an individual walnut somehow. Leibniz was a cinephile, which means like an Anglophile likes the pub and English things. A cinephile is somebody who likes Chinese culture, and Leibniz invented his in the 1500s as a German, and he invented his binary system, which represents all numbers in terms of ones and zeros, inspired by the Yi Jing divination system, and a lot of things, and there were others, working on plenty of things in the area, as well as that. But as the innovator, Leibniz was communicating with Christian missionaries in China, and he, like some of the missionaries, believed that Europeans could learn much from Confucianism that was in line with Christianity. Of course, very much thinking we can use, Confucius was translated around in the 1500s, and in Leibniz's day, was definitely by 1600 in translation. I have the dates precisely more somewhere, I think mid-1500s, and was in Latin for a bunch of Europeans to be fascinated with, and definitely set in the context of this is very much showing that God was somehow in China plenty, talking like Jesus through this guy, so let's use all that for European Christianity. I don't know. We're very much into that, as well as I'm sure all different sorts of mind states and opinions about all of that, of course. That is definitely what was put legally into print, overall. As is the ways of life. And Leibniz. He was admirer, Leibniz, of the Chinese abacus. And you can see, and I have put what the sort of thing Leibniz was working on as the early calculator is very much a hand crank abacus. It's very much like you can crank a very simple arithmetic problem shut by just putting a crank on an abacus and figuring out how to make an abacus do Abyssinian mechanisms. Yes, I'm pretty sure that is not a techno group playing at Gilman right now. So, yes, Leibniz was one of the innovators of the calculator and the early computer, and this is based in part on the Chinese Yi Jing and Germans, unfortunately. So our computers, internet, and phones, and this video and all of that, hello, hi Mom, how's breaking the fourth wall for you? Are in part, and my silliness, based on the ancient Chinese Yi Jing, at least in practice and electricity. So, much happiness, yes. That is a bit about the Yi Jing. And, hopefully your days are up and down and in positive ways. And again, as always, I will see you if I ever see you.